Hi, Dr. Dave Webster, and on part of my video blog series on the travesty of PET CT access in Ontario. We have the most restricted access to PET in the entire civilized advanced medical world on the planet. And this is about things in Ontario, the situation where critical healthcare policies affecting you and your loved ones are based not on the methods of science, but they are based entirely on a political agenda, which is in fact directed against our patients. And this is just part of my video blog series to document that, an update for July 2018. So we did have the 2018 elections, and as everyone knows, Doug Ford won handily. The Liberal Party was eliminated. So, his brother Rob Ford had died horribly from cancer, and so I wrote, Doug back in March, and I just said, look, you're the perfect guy. You know what it's like to experience personally someone who has cancer in Ontario. You have a unique opportunity as the Progressive Conservative Party to finally bring patients up from last place in the world and into the era of 21st century medicine. And you not only are going to give better and more humane health care quality, but you are actually going to dramatically reduce costs to the taxpayers to provide this kind of higher level care. But based on my conversations and subsequent information, I basically have to assume that they're going to simply continue on as is. And the most telling part of this was Ms. Christine Elliott was appointed the Minister of Health. Now, there's an article, she did have a serious head injury a year ago and spent some time in hospital, and she said based on that, and most importantly, her experience as Ontario's first patient ombudsman, that made her the perfect health minister, Minister of Health for Ontario. But I guess it depends what you want that Minister of Health to do, because she, in fact, was dealt with very specific patients who were, no question, we as physicians were forced to assault because of how Cancer Care Ontario directs what we can do. She was aware that physicians were threatened with loss of their hospital privileges for standing up for these patients, but she dismissed every aspect of what happened to these patients as either excellent care for all or just not part of her mandate and of no concern to her. And to this date, starting in January, she has absolutely refused to respond to registered letters and requests from both patients and surviving members of these patients to justify her position on that, and she continues to refuse to do so. And also Dr. Ruben Devlin, a very nicely paid now patronage appointment, and I initially was hopeful that he might be willing to make some changes. I said more than 30 email exchanges, all will be posted on the internet, and I had a telephone conversation, and it became clear as the election was going on that they were just patting me on the head and just hoping I'd go away. And so I wrote him afterwards and basically said, assume everything's going to go the same. And he had this abrupt response that we've heard your concerns, you should assume nothing. Yeah, we need to assume that they're going to continue on. I have no indication whatsoever that they are not going to do anything but continue the assault on Ontario's patients. In addition, what he did was Ms. Bonnie Lisk, who is our Auditor General, had in the 2018 report said Ontario patients have the least number of PET scans per thousand population of any place on the planet where PET is offered for the benefit of patients. So in May, I wrote her and I pointed out the issues behind the scenes, and in addition, pointed out that as an Auditor General, there are massive amounts of money that are wasted on absolutely useless tests that do nothing but make some physician groups very wealthy, but do nothing for the patients, in fact, except cause harm. No response. So then I was dealing with Andreas Lapakis. Now, Dr. Lapakis was the first president and CEO of ISIS. He authored the report that took the recommendation of an independent group of experts in medicine that recommended in the late 90s 40,000 patients would benefit from PET immediately. He reduced that to 0, and so on. And so I was dealing with him. He's now been appointed in Health Quality Ontario. But one of the claims they've made on their site is they're going to be using rigorous methods of science. But what's very clear, and is documented already in my other videos and on my website, is that he agrees there's absolutely zero science behind how these decisions are made. So I wrote him and said, please, how can you make these claims and about rigorous science when you know there's no science? And in his response, he just simply reiterated to me how proud he is of his work on reducing 40,000 patients to 0 based on non-science but a political agenda, refused to answer a single question. So then what I did was I once again went after our ombudsman / watchdog / lapdogs for the governments, and I pointed this out. I said, you need to investigate this because of these claims of health or Quality Health Ontario. They are false. They are not using science. They are using a political agenda. Again, no response, but at least the information will be on the internet when somebody finally deals with this. I also, there's no question I will go into this in detail other times, but we, as physicians, are forced to assault our patients unequivocally, we are forced to assault them. So I wrote Mr. Tony Laparco, who's the Special Investigations Head of the Toronto Police Unit, and explained all the details to him. Now, he could have written me and said, David, you've approached the wrong person, but maybe you could talk to these people. No response from our police. So I then contacted numerous people. In fact, I sent out 19 letters to McMaster University, and one of the things I asked them to and pointed out was that McMaster University is and continues to perform experiments that were considered unethical and bordering on immoral on their patients. I wrote the Chancellor of the University, Dr. Susan Labarge, Dr. Patrick Dean, President and Vice Chancellor, Mr. David Farrer, Provost. He's the Provost and Vice President Academic, Dr. Rob Baker, Vice President of Research, and Dr. Paul O'Byrne, Dean and Vice President of the Health Sciences Program, as well as the McMaster Health Science Ethics Group, the ones that makes the decisions about the experiments they're allowed to do. Not a single response or acknowledgement from any of them. So then I wrote again the key CCO groups and asked them to defend the PET Predict trial. That was Dr. Michael Scherer, President and CEO of Cancer Care Ontario, and Mr. Ratan Raliaram, who's the chair. And you'll remember it was Dr. Scherer who threatened my loss of hospital privileges if I spoke to physicians and patients about how PET's handled in Ontario. Dr. Julian Dobranowski, who's provincial head of cancer imaging for Cancer Care Ontario, Dr. Mark Levine, director of Ontario Clinical Oncology Group, or OCOG, and Dr. Ermetzer, current chair of the PET Steering Committee, as well as Dr. Michael Schul, who's now at the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Studies, or ISIS. That was the original position Dr. Lapaugas had. The only one who responded yet again to me was Dr. Mark Levine, absolutely outraged that I would dare suggest that he should have to defend what he's done to these patients. And in fact, he was so outraged he sent letters to my chief of staff and a whole bunch of people basically trying to shut me down, which makes it clear that he knows his position is indefensible. And of course, I sent all copies of all these letters to our most trusted professional sources of news and information. That included Alice Uncles, editor-in-chief of Maclean's Magazine, Mr. Philip Crowley, publisher and CEO of the Globe and Mail, Mr. David Walmsley, editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail, senior editor and staff of the CBC News, and of course their ombudsman there to ensure quality journalism, Ms. Esther Enkin, also to Ms. Wendy Freeman, president of CTV News, senior editor and editorial staff of the Fifth Estate, and Toronto Life. Not a single response. Has anybody seen anything in the news? Anybody think that, the Ontario government and their experts doing unethical, immoral experiments on patients might be something, these professional journalists might be interested in? Is anyone surprised that it's not? I'll have a lot more to say about that. And in particular, I'd like you to pay attention to Ms. Wendy Mesley. She's the weekly you see here. They're proud professional journalist, but she had breast cancer. Repeatedly over the years, I've tried to contact her, including registered letters recently. She is aware of absolutely every issue, particularly regarding the unethical experiments performed on breast cancer patients in this province. She has refused repeatedly to even acknowledge my letters. And my position, I'll have more to say about that, is that I think it's finally time that we took people like Wendy Mesley, and we need to hold them fully accountable, liable, even criminally if necessary. And in Australia, criminal charges were laid against how government bureaucrats blocked PET. But this is a flagrant, agenda-driven, we're hearing the term fake news, reporting. And the government couldn't have gotten away with and continue to get away with what they're doing to our patients if it wasn't for the efforts of people like Ms. Wendy Mesley. So, if you still are living under the illusion that in Ontario we at least have some checks and balances and safeguards to protect us from the kind of elected people we have as politicians and their senior bureaucrats, think again. The only way Ontario patients will ever move literally from last place in the civilized medical world is if we use social media tools we have at our fingertips to demand change. One positive outlook, if there could be, is that Doug Ford apparently is backing down on his election promise to change the sex education program because there's been such political outrage. We need to create a tidal wave using social media to demand that these people, our politicians and their senior bureaucrats and medical experts, be held fully accountable and finally let our patients have access to the 21st century medicine. So here's my websites and various places of getting in contact with me. I'll have more to say as the summer ends and we get more active in the fall again. Thanks for listening.